Trump is in contempt of court and has been threatened with jail time if he again violates the gag order, and testimony from the stand continues to bury him alive, just as he buried the Stormy Daniels scandal, and none of that is close to being as important as his new and most virulent threat yet to destroy this country via political violence. And it underscores why we, loyal Americans, must destroy his cult first. Cover story Time magazine, all of the nightmares of Trump becoming dictator, but laid out with unusual clarity for someone as insane and demented as Trump. Quoting the interviewer, Eric Cortellessa, Trump does not dismiss the possibility of political violence around the election. Quoting Trump, if we don't win, it depends. It always depends on the fairness of the election. The author asks him about his social media post in which Trump claimed a stolen election allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. Trump then denies he said it. Quoting Trump, I never said that at all. I never said that at all. Within moments of that lie, no, not a lie, a distinction without a difference in that he never said it. He merely wrote it on Truth Social on December 3rd, 2022. Within moments of that, he declares that the current administration has, quote, broken the Constitution. They have gotten very far astray from our Constitution. I'm talking about the fascists and the people in our government right now because I consider them the enemy within. I think the enemy within, in many cases, is much more dangerous for our country than the outside enemies of China, Russia, and various others that would be called enemies, depending on who the president is, unquote. What about his remarks about becoming a dictator, but only on day one? He says he was kidding. Doesn't he realize it horrifies those who see dictatorship as the opposite of America? Quote, I think a lot of people like it. About that, he is clearly not kidding. He is ready to give his imaginary slaves what he insists they want. He has now told Time magazine that he is ready to use the National Guard, in effect, as his personal police force, and the rest of the military as his personal police force, and your local police force as his personal police force, and to build migrant detention camps to hold millions rounded up by the National Guard. Quote, if they weren't able to, then I'd use the military. The interviewer adds, quote, he would also seek help from local police and says he would deny funding for jurisdictions that decline to adopt his policies. Trump would send the National Guard into cities to fight crime without the required request of governors because that FBI data showing homicides dropping 6% in 2022 and 13% more last year, quote, it's a lie. He would approve Department of Justice funds only for use in those cities that use police strong-arm tactics that he designates, like stop and frisk. This is how Hitler talked before he seized power. It is how Mao talked. It is how Mussolini talked. It is how all of them have talked. It is how Trump is talking. The cops, per his interview with Time, would then be free to help monitor pregnancies and arrest and prosecute women and physicians and nurses and hospitals, women and the others who violate abortion bans, and he'll blame any draconian abortion bans on others. Quote Trump, it's irrelevant whether I'm comfortable or not. It's totally irrelevant because the states are going to make those decisions. The military will be available for suppression of dissent and civilian rights because, well, to hell with Ukraine and Taiwan, and now add to that list to hell with South Korea. Quoting Trump, we have 40,000 troops that are in a precarious position, which doesn't make any sense. Why would we defend somebody? And we're talking about a very wealthy country. And while we already know about the January 6 pardons and his belief that protests in Portland were far more perilous, and the prosecutions and the Schedule F firings of the bureaucratically competent to be replaced by Trump whores, While we've known about all of that for a long time, we have two new weapons on the horizon that Trump has revealed in this Time interview. If he ordered a U.S. attorney to prosecute you, and the U.S. attorney refused, he would break more than 250 years of American tradition and fire the U.S. attorney and replace him with somebody who would prosecute you. And if none of that democracy stuff matters to you, he doubled down on a 10% tariff on all imported goods. All. A tariff. A 10% tax on you. Quoting Trump, it may be more than that. It may be a derivative of that. Look, when they come in and they steal our jobs and they steal our wealth, they steal our country more than 10%. Yeah, I call it a ring around the country. And most subtly, perhaps most damagingly, as the interviewer writes, quote, he would, at his personal discretion, withhold funds appropriated by Congress, according to top advisors, restoring the power of impoundment, which allowed presidents to withhold congressionally appropriated funds. Trump and his allies plan to challenge a 1974 law that prohibits the use of the measure. So the police become militarized, and the military becomes Trump's personal Gestapo, and the states and the cities that don't promise fealty to him don't get federal allocations, and the federal government becomes his personal staff. And if he doesn't win all the elections, they are unfair elections, and violence is fine. And most people want a dictator anyway, and he chooses who gets prosecuted, and he chooses which budgeted money gets spent and where, because he'll give himself a line item veto, and he'll put anybody here illegally into concentration camps, or anybody he says is here illegally. And if that is you, exactly who are you going to get to stop him? Heard enough yet? Stop him now, while we still can. The gist of the testimony yesterday at the trial, or as Trump calls it, nap time, was that the former attorney for Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal never had a doubt that when he was selling their stories to the National Enquirer via Michael Cohen in 2016, that Cohen and the rest of them were all acting on behalf of Trump. It was so obvious who the money was from and the influence was for, said Keith Davidson, that in 2016 he texted the publication's editor, quote, throw in an ambassadorship for me. But most importantly in court, Justice Juan Merchan did it fast, and he glossed over the highlights, but he found Trump guilty of contempt of court for violating the gag order in 9 of the 10 cases submitted by the prosecution. He fined him the max per $1,000 each, $9,000 in total. And the justice matter-of-factly writes that for a Trump, the money means nothing because the money is nothing. Quoting, it would be preferable if the court could impose a fine more commensurate with the wealth of the contemnor. In some cases, that might be a $2,500 fine. In other cases, it might be a fine of $150,000. Because this court is not cloaked with such discretion, it must therefore consider whether in some instances jail may be a necessary punishment. If you wonder if Trump actually felt the impact there of Merchan hitting him in the crotch with the jail stick, jail may be a necessary punishment, please note that while after court adjourned, Trump continued to attack the judge and call the trial rigged. His next most controversial social media post was, quoting, Harris Faulkner, happy 10th year anniversary. Nobody does it better than you. Congratulations. While he was in the courtroom, Trump got some really bad electoral news if somebody read it to him. Aaron Blake of the Washington Post found it inside a Monmouth University poll released on Monday. It asked voters if they'd consider voting for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Democrats were slightly more likely to say yes than were Republicans. But then the pollsters asked the same people if they knew that Kennedy, quote, claims that autism is linked to vaccines and that he has floated a conspiracy theory that COVID was targeted at certain racial groups. And then it asked those same people if, knowing his vaccine beliefs, they would now consider voting for him. The number of Republicans who said they now would consider voting for RFK Jr. instantly rose dramatically. In fact, it nearly doubled. It went up 8 percentage points to nearly 1 out of 5. And the number of Democrats, that dropped by 7 points, down to 1 in 10. Seems like a campaign ad to me. Back at the ranch, also of note, Trump was hoisted twice upon his own petards. As the judge said he would, he ruled on whether or not Trump could go to his son Barron's high school graduation as soon as the trial schedule became clear. It has. He can go on May 17th. Now let's see if he goes, or if the school's commencement is, by an incredible coincidence, a golf tournament. And he whined on the way in again about how cold it was in that courtroom. And then, surprise, yesterday, it was too warm. The New York Times reported it first, quote, Trump has been sitting with his eyes closed for significant portions of testimony this morning. Then at 12:26 p.m., NBC News reported Trump appeared to have fallen asleep while listening to testimony, at times appearing to stir and then falling back to sleep. Trump's eyes were closed for extended periods, and his head at times jerked in a way consistent with sleeping. Jerk. After the break at 2:39 p.m., the Times again, quote, Trump is posed exactly as he was for much of this morning, eyes closed, leaning back in his seat. And that was when it finally hit me. Ever seen the Geico commercial, the hockey commercial, where the hockey coach has had the brainstorm of all brainstorms to replace his goaltender with a 12-foot-tall, 3,000-pound walrus?
It's not just easy. It's having a walrus in goal easy.
It's a walrus! Ridiculous!
Yes! Nice save, big guy! Good job, Duncan! Way to go! Duncan, stay up. No sleepies.
Donald, stay up. No sleepies. Hell, even the walrus part fits. Also of interest here on this all-new edition of Countdown, Jesse Waters of Fox insists the gag order on Trump is unconstitutional and then boasts that he's not a lawyer. If this lack of functioning brain cells or awareness of hypocrisy and self-contradiction, if that sounds familiar to you, let me remind you. Jesse Waters used to be the guy that Bill O'Reilly sent out to stalk women reporters who wrote bad things about Bill O'Reilly and women. Tales of Billo and water sports. That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
ahead of us on this all-new edition of Countdown. This thing yesterday where the worst person segment flowed seamlessly into Things I Promised Not to Tell, starring the same people, I liked that. So now I'm going to try it again. I'm going to go from Jesse Waters, the new chief moron at Fox, doing something moronic, even dumber than Hannity, to his old boss and mentor, Bill O'Reilly. Billo, the big giant head. Tales of Waters and O'Reilly and tales and women and stalking next in Things I Promised Not to Tell. And there will be, out of mothballs, the Bill O'Reilly impression. First, still more new idiots to talk about, the daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's worst persons in the world. The bronze, worse, the New York Mets. Baseball's most elaborate merchandise marketing scheme, the City Connect uniforms, has been kind of up and down. Well, down with occasional ups. Maybe one or two ups. Okay, a rumor of one up. The premise is to create new uniforms and hats and coats and hoodies that bear no resemblance to the team's traditional colors or logos, but have some vague connection to its city or region or whatever else can be sold at a huge markup. The San Francisco Giants have an orange fog on their City Connect uniforms. The Boston Red Sox, black and red since the 1930s, are dressed in the light blue and yellow of the Boston Marathon, and also, unfortunately, the light blue and yellow of the old Boston Yellow Pages phone book. The whole thing was complicated by this year's baseball uniform crisis, in which the industry and the Fanatics and Nike companies decided to redesign all the uniforms to fit worse, look worse, tear more easily, retain more sweat, have smaller and more amateurish numbers and letters, and be delivered late. Several teams still don't have their City Connect uniforms, which may be a blessing in disguise. Anyway, finally we come to the Mets. Their City Connects came in on time and are innovative and went over well. Kind of thick black pinstripe on a metallic gray with all kinds of purple accents to represent the colors of the 7-line subway that goes to their stadium. And unexpectedly, there was a huge response to the Mets batting helmets. They're a matte gray with a raised Mets logo in the middle, and in an unprecedented innovation, an embossed, raised representation of the 59th Street Bridge. Or if you're from Queens, the Queensboro Bridge. Or if you're from the 1980s, the Ed Koch Bridge. This miniature bridge goes from one side of the helmet to the other. It's as wide as the brim of the helmet. Looks like you could drive a little toy car across it. There's the tall Manhattan Tower of the bridge on the left and the tall Queens Tower of the bridge on the right. The Mets wore the City Connect uniforms and the helmets for the second time the other night. Somewhere along the way of that second game, it became apparent to a bunch of us that as dramatic and innovative as that raised model of the bridge on the helmet was, the stadium lights reflecting off the glittering surface of the little bridge, the shadows it casts, the suspended deck sweeping from one tower on the left side of the helmet to the other tower on the right side of the helmet, it also looked kind of like something else. A tiara. The bridge sitting there on the Mets players' batting helmets kind of looks like a tiara. I mean, a well-done and very artistic tiara, but still, a tiara. The Mets are wearing tiaras. The silver, worser Kayleigh McEnany, who segued seamlessly from Trump's worst press secretary to Fox's worst host. Well, it's a tie, but you know what I mean. If you ask Ms. McEnany to handle math, she's in trouble. If you ask her to handle truth, she's in more trouble. If you ask her to try both at the same time, she's cooked. People, she says on the Jesse Waters show, which is, I believe, titled, Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? People, they think back to 3 years ago and they remember the good old days of President Trump. 3 years ago would be May 1st, 2021, which would have been 102 days into the administration of President Biden. In fact, it was 10 days after the confirmation that Biden had fulfilled his promise of getting Americans 200 million doses of the COVID vaccine before his 100th day in office. But Kayleigh has a problem doing those complicated math problems of history. 24 minus 3 equals 20, 21, 206. Amazingly, though, she was not the dumbest person on that Fox program that day, because in terms of stupidity and density, the host is head and shoulders above the rest of them there. And by that I mean he's head and shoulders. He's just a stack of hair with some shampoo in it that has achieved sentience. He's not just the head and shoulders of Fox, though. He's the Paul Mitchell of the propagandists and the L'Oreal of the white supremacists. Our winner, the worst, Jesse Waters. Jesse Waters says the Trump gag order is not constitutional. He said if one of the jurors was the Loch Ness Monster, this would deny Trump the right to say the Loch Ness Monster is real, and that's not constitutional. The Loch Ness Monster is real. It's not Just for the record, let me acknowledge that this is the smartest and most creative thing Jesse Waters has ever thought, let alone said out loud. The rest of his quote? They're threatening to throw the Republican nominee for president in jail for talking during the election. I am not a lawyer, unquote. Well, to be honest, you're also not a newscaster and you're not a functioning adult. But about this not a lawyer part, honestly, you're not a lawyer, but you still think it's unconstitutional? Doesn't that make you fit to be a member of the Supreme Court? Jesse, what if the Loch Ness Monster was Trump's running mate? Waters, very possibly the dumbest man in America. More on him in a moment. Emphasis of the moron. And he is today's worst person in the world! Number one story on the countdown, and my favorite topic, me and things I promised not to tell. Although I've already told this one. Years ago, when Bill O'Reilly was still a thing, rather than an occasional guest on an unwatched show on an unknown television network that usually does not get a larger audience than does this podcast, Bill O'Reilly used to send out one of his junior producers to, bluntly, stalk people. This guy would wait around corners and behind bushes, and he'd just spring out, the cameraman already rolling, and confront the people O'Reilly wanted to scare or humiliate or embarrass or all of the above. He tried it with the chairman of GE and thus of NBC, Jeff Immelt, and famously, he almost got himself arrested for following the car of reporter Amanda Turkle for 2 hours while she was driving at the start of her vacation. And then, cameraman rolling, they sprung out and confronted her about an article she had written about Bill O'Reilly. At the next White House Correspondents' Dinner, another journalist confronted this O'Reilly flack. His name was Jesse Waters. The other correspondent, using only a phone, demanded that Jesse Waters apologize to the woman he had chased, Amanda Turkle. Instead, Waters swatted the phone out of the reporter's hand and then went on O'Reilly's show to complain that he didn't understand what the problem was. He was at the party just to have a good time. As that suggests, Jesse Waters has always been a deeply stupid man. So stupid that he has no concept of how stupid he is. On Countdown, we kind of did a piece about him. Advice from me on video on your options if you too were to be ambushed by an O'Reilly stalker chasing you with his car. Can't really rerun it here, too many sight gags. But it reminded me that one of Waters' main jobs was to protect Bill O'Reilly from critical articles that mentioned Bill's little problem with women. the one he would wind up paying at least $50 million to settle with the women involved, and losing his 8 p.m. slot on Fox as well. The slot now occupied by Jesse Waters, who may be stupid, but who's no dummy. And who might add, who you calling a slot? Anyway, this has inspired me to revisit my files and offer you something that has not seen the light of day since the spring of 2008, a countdown analysis of Jesse's old boss, Bill O'Reilly, virtually word for word as it aired, and it sounded something like this. After years of talking out of his seat, Bill O'Reilly has finally found a subject to pontificate about in which his personal knowledge actually reaches to the level of expertise, a topic in which he is not just hypocritical scold, but rather battle-scarred veteran. Bill O analyzes Eliot Spitzer. The New York governor's resignation only just became official after he was caught up in the federal investigation into a prostitution ring. Spitzer, as you doubtless know, has been accused of financial shenanigans, possibly employing state funds to pay for the services of Kristen, the singing prostitute with the heart of gold, or at hundreds of dollars an hour, the something of gold. And for reasons known only to our Fox friend, Billy decided to deconstruct the Spitzer saga in the latest edition of his not-so-widely read newspaper column. Again, when it comes to having your pockets drained and your name turned into a punchline by your pursuit of a woman, O'Reilly knows his material. Why he would write this column and remind everybody of all this all over again, well, maybe in trying to explain Spitzer, perhaps Billo wound up explaining Billo. We take you back to October 13th, 2004, also known around the news business as Cable Christmas. His former producer at Fox, Andrea Macris, filed suit against O'Reilly and Fox on that day in 2004 for $60 million, claiming he had repeatedly harassed her by telling her lurid stories of his own sexual history, describing his fantasies, trying to corral her into sexual liaisons by phone, in person, with others, with loofahs, and with a falafel. The case was settled just over 2 weeks later, with Billo shelling out a reported $10 million. So, Billy decided to write about Spitzer? Leave us quote from the writings of the bard of babeology, the Frank Burns of news, the falafel king himself, and then translate for you back into what he really meant. Let's analyze this Eliot Spitzer situation without emotion, because there are lessons to be learned here. Expensive lessons. Embarrassing lessons. Lessons which, even if they cost you $10 million, you might forget and bring the topic up again anyway. If you watch cable TV news, you will hear the braying pack talk about Spitzer's arrogance, his I'm above it all mentality. But if you examine the facts, this shallow analysis doesn't wash. Hey, pal, if you're going to call Greta Van Susteren, Sean Hannity, and John Gibson the braying pack of cable TV news, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside. Governor Spitzer had to know that repeated visits with people breaking the law, prostitutes, put him at enormous risk. At any time, any one of those ladies might have been arrested and, facing prosecution, could have easily offered authorities Spitzer's name in return for having all charges dropped. Translation: if you're going to associate yourself with prostitutes, strippers, porn stars, or other ladies who might be arrested, make sure you do it like Billo does. Defendant Bill O'Reilly, reads item 42 in the Andrea Macris lawsuit, without solicitation or invite, regaled plaintiff and her friend with stories of a girl at a sex show in Thailand who had shown him things in a back room that had, quote, blown his mind, unquote. Yes, if you're going to visit with sex workers, make sure you do it like Billo does, in a foreign country with weak extradition laws. The ladies also could have blackmailed Spitzer, could have sold their stories about him to the tabloid media, could have done many things to destroy his life. Translation: Here, Bill is saying, trust me, I know. And for a change, he sure does know. And then there's the money. Spitzer well knew that wire transfers to offshore facilities are closely monitored because of terrorist surveillance. Translation, Billow is here in a roundabout way tipping his hat to the former governor. Mr. Spitzer paid a reported $80,000 for a variety of activities. Mr. O'Reilly paid a reported $10 million to Andrea Macris, and he didn't even get her into the sack. Spitzer also knew that talking on the telephone to pimps, people setting up liaisons with prostitutes, left him open to being tapped. There are many psychoanalytic geniuses insist no coincidences in speech or in writing. The word tapped is used. It's very close to taped and just as close to the phrase tapped out. And by the way, the word tapped also has another meaning, doesn't it? Item 36 in the Macris suit. Defendant Bill O'Reilly proceeded to inform defendant Andrea Macris that he advised another woman to purchase a vibrator and had taught that woman how to masturbate while telling her sexual stories over the telephone. So you're telling me that Elliot Spitzer thought he wouldn't get caught? Sure, and I'm Paris Hilton. Now we have that image. No, what's in play here is what I call the Belushi syndrome. That's when a famous person who has money and success subconsciously tries to destroy himself. You see it all the time. Movie stars, athletes, and politicians doing incredibly stupid stuff. The Belushi syndrome, you say? This is not some dime store psychoanalysis. Unless by dime you mean 10 million. There are many people walking around who are deeply self-destructive and who will hurt themselves and others around them. That's a fact. A self-destructive, self-loathing personality will find a way to blow everything up, and it doesn't matter what kind of career the person has. Either kind of career, Bill. Broadcast or cable television. We all know people like this. Stay away from them. And as we digest your analysis of what makes what makes Spitzer tick, we'd be happy to stay away from people like this, Bill O'Reilly, if only you would stay away from us. You can't buy memories like those, huh? If only I had other Bill O'Reilly scripts still in my computer. Oh, look! There's only 38 of them. I've done all the damage I can do here, for now. Thank you for listening. Countdown musical directors Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel arranged, produced, and performed most of our music. Mr. Ray was on guitars, bass, and drums. Mr. Chanel handled orchestration and keyboards. It was produced by TKO Brothers. Other music, including some of the Beethoven compositions, were arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. The sports music is the Olbermann theme from ESPN2. It was written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by Nancy Faust, the best baseball stadium organist ever. My announcer today was my friend Larry David, and everything else was pretty much my fault. So that's Countdown for this, the 189th day until the 2024 presidential election, and the 1,212th day since Donald J. Trump's first attempted coup against the democratically elected government of the United States. Use the justice system, use the mental health system, use the not regularly given elector objection option, use the Donald the Walrus no sleepies bit to stop him from doing it again while we still can. By the way, did I ever tell you whose idea it was when I returned to MSNBC in 2003 to do a regular feature on what Bill O'Reilly said on Fox that wasn't true? Do you know who called me up the day my new then show started in 2003 and said, you've got to do something about him? He makes stuff up every night. You've got to use it. You know you can. You must do it. It was an NBC News Washington correspondent named Nora O'Donnell, now the anchor of the CBS Evening News. It's her idea. The next scheduled countdown is tomorrow. Bulletins as the news warrants. Till then, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.
Duncan, stay up. No sleepies.